would you want to give an introduction to people that may not know who you are? Introduce yourself, give them your, your political or philosophical positions or both, and yeah, tell them what John Zerzan really stands for if they are not familiar with you.
Well, I'm a writer. I've been an anarchist since the 1960s, and uh, as things have developed, I've become more a critic of civilization and technology and their impact on society. And now we're seeing the failure of civilization, I think, at every level in every area, and it's past time for a reckoning. We got to confront that reality. It's like the elephant in the room. It seems to me there it is, but it's not really uh, respectable, perhaps, to talk about it. And so the tragedy deepens. I would say.
Yeah, absolutely. I think nobody would disagree with the fact that there are certainly pertinent problems that are occurring as a consequence of technological development and industrialization. I mean, a vocal critic of this, and this is the means by which I actually became aware of you, is Ted Kaczynski, right? And I've come to know that you and Ted Kaczynski actually differ in quite a lot of ways. And I would also like to know, and I'd pose this as kind of like a two-part question. Firstly, you talked about revolution and a response to this being necessitated. Would a revolution look like how somebody like Ted Kaczynski would imagine it, like violent and it would need to be immediate? Or would it look like something that is gradual and progressive over time and is implemented throughout knowledge, getting people to become more aware of the problems that are occurring within society so that they can actually be cognizant of it themselves and then try to act on it with their own will?
I would prefer the latter, to be sure. I mean, who knows what it's going to take, or if it will ever happen at all. A successful confrontation with civilization and technology, because I think only if there's a dialogue in society, a conversation in society, can it be different. It's. I think historically we've seen the failure of violent revolution, which so often just seems to produce a new domination rather than a fundamental change.
Right. Right. And I would like to investigate about this a little bit more because I feel like at some point it would become detrimental, wouldn't it? Like, couldn't you hypothetically think of? I mean, I think it would be easy to conceptualize or visualize a world, say, a century forward, wherein everything is operated by technology and is essentially not recognizable as kind of human or humane or natural. Do you think this would warrant? I guess you could say we're at a threshold here. We've passed the threshold wherein we were just trying to get people to recognize change themselves, trying to recognize the problems within technological development, and where it is a necessity to carry this out, I guess, physically, or for like a militant group to actually make the first step towards change.
Well, it could happen that way. I mean, it's such a totality. The juggernaut of technology is has really conquered everything, even thinking. The Chat GPT uh, here in Eugene, Oregon. It's the University of Oregon location, and I know various people who teach at the university, and they're uh, very upset at the level of thinking its decline. That students, the machine produces the answer. That's one part of it. An obvious part of it is you push the button and GPT gives you the answer. So there's a tendency to skip the rigors of thought, of knowing how to think through something. Who needs it? It's an appalling development, and it's very depressing to people I know who teach. They see how ill-equipped the kids are.
Yeah.
They don't even know quite what that means to analyze something, and try to judge what's going on.
Right. And I think, well, I guess a question that might arise when following this line of reasoning is, well, do we delineate or differentiate between I guess, the the net negativity of technology, its contributions to human society, and how we're supposed to operate in totality as like their equivalent. So, for example, something like AI, would we say that that invention or the usage of something like a technology like that would be equally bad to something as like the invention of the wheel, which could be seen as a kind of technology? And would these two things be equivalent in the capacity that they're negatives towards society?
Well, I don't know. I think one way to look at it is there's a distinction between tools and technology.
Really?
Uh, yeah, I think thinking anthropologically about it, there was a very long period, a million years ago or so, human species figured out how to control fire for uh, for defense, for cooking, and so forth. And that wasn't a domination. It was available to everybody, basically, on the same level.
Right.
But the high tech world is very hierarchical and in the hands of specialists, not in the hands of the average person at all. I mean, it stands over people. It seems to me it's not a tool. It's a whole system. It's a whole context.
Right. So I think this gets to the more fundamental part of it. I corresponded with you in the emails, and I talked about how I'm going to be going to the much more metaphysical aspect of these things. Well, like the question would then become, well, what then makes it bad? Is it the usage of it? Is it the application of it by people that are, in control and in dominion over its application, over people that are not cognizant that it is being negatively used to impact them negatively? Is that what it is? Or is there like some um, intrinsic factor and like some intrinsic essential identity to technological development that makes it necessarily wrong um, within society?
I think it is the very nature of the technology. What does it require for its very existence? That's an ontological question, and I think the answer is easily plumbed. I mean, you can see where it comes from. How it develops, and it goes all the way back, in my opinion, to the move to domestication, which some people have said is the worst mistake in human history. The move to control, the ethos of control, which is always being deepened and extended. I mean, that's a fairly obvious observation. And that has to do with the nature of the beast. It's not just how you use it. That's only a secondary problem, it seems to me. It's a real question, it's a real problem, but it's not the basic one. In
Right.
fact, here's a parallel. It strikes me. This is a quote from, I think his name was, he was Palestinian, as a matter of fact. He said, the university teaches everything about society except what it is. And that's always struck me as a very fundamental insight. And it's the same with technology. You
Right.
can pay attention to the misuse, use, the addictive nature of it is built in by the corporations, and that's horrible. But it's even deeper uh, a problem than that. And if you come to the conclusion that the very nature of it is a problem.
Right. Right. Well, I guess the taking the devil's advocate position, because I really want to understand the I guess the ethical um line underlining between this and transhumanism. I saw you did a debate with somebody on in the Stanford University on transhumanism versus this kind of anarcho-primitivist mode of thought, and I wanted to deliberate upon that a little bit more and saying, well, if is it not determined by what if it's utile to society? What if people enjoy that their ability to access things easier within society? What if they enjoy the fact that everything that they need is at the tip of their fingers, and all they really need to do is exert themselves at a very minimal level to get where they want to go in life using technology? What if it's determined by that, or is it not, or can it not be?
See, I mean, that's a transaction, if you will, and certainly it's useful. It wouldn't exist if there was no use value. I mean, I find it handy. You can look up things very easily, as you say. Uh, but at what cost? I mean, where are we going with all this? I mean, it's just getting worse. Like these data centers that suck up all the energy and the water, that's fueling the AI movement. It's required, and that is an obvious horrendous cost. So sure, it's there's a role that's being filled by it, and I use it too. I mean, we're all part of it in a sense. There's no outside of it now. There's just it's the whole civilization is based on capital and technology,
Right.
more and more so technology, which is the universal uh, medium of everything now. It's just so immersive and dominant that it seems like every day the that fact is a deeper and deeper truth.
Right. And
So,
I
but
go ahead.
will we come to a point where people say, "Is it worth it? Where is it taking us?" Overall, I mean, it could happen that people just think this is a suicidal path. This is not worth it.
Right.
We need to stop this direction if in fact it's increasingly visibly suicidal. Then you stop doing it. You get rid of it.
Right. And so
That may or may never happen. I mean, I'm not predicting. There are only small signs of opposition, really. There's Luddite clubs, the Lamp Club you might have heard of just very recently in the news, with its sort of chapters of young people uh, staging demonstrations where they smash their iPhones, that sort of thing. They have a big party, and they don't want it. They're tired of social media and being on their phone every second. I mean, it's a pretty lifeless existence, really.
right. And so I think we can agree that there are descriptive negative impacts on quality of life, people's self-image, perception of themselves, and we're talking about in a very historic way. We're talking about it in a very we're looking into the future, so to speak, and we're saying, well, what's going to happen? Where's the singularity? What point is it going to take us to? But I want to know, instead of the descriptive, do you have anything to say about, well, the prescriptions, like what should people do, like people's moral obligations? Is it in the same way that a communist might say that, hey, it is an obligation for us, yeah, we're forced into this system of capitalism, but we may have an obligation, or we must have an obligation, depending on what kind of communist disposition you have. We have an obligation to detach ourselves from capitalism as much as we can. Would you say that you would hold a position like that morally or ethically, in a very analogous way to that? Like, you have an obligation to detach yourself from the technological world and to be reclusive so that you minimize it and you don't add to the negative effects?
Insofar as it's possible, but it's the way things are set up. I mean, here we are conversing via the technology. I mean, that's the way it's done. There's less and less face to face real connection, living connection between people. It's all done by the machine. I mean, and I'm glad that we're having this chance to talk. I'm not saying, like people have said to me, well, if you're so much against it, you should go live in a cave and you know diverse yourself completely. Well, first of all, where are the caves? That's kind of impossible. Plus, I'm trying to engage with these problems. I'm trying to provide some input into the possible dialogue, the conversation, which, as I said before, strikes me as the only possible beginning of opposition where we can talk about these things and put it on the table and weigh the different costs and benefits and its future. Where is it going? What is it showing us?
Right.
If that doesn't get to happen, then it'll never change, I guess. But that's a big step forward. If it's being publicly debated, well, then maybe major change can happen.
So would you say that it is more utile for people of this disposition to actually use technology to destroy it, like to potentially get it closer and closer towards the minimization of technology being so distributed within society? Would you say that it's more that's kind of like your moral imperative, instead of just becoming a recluse and not actually providing for the movement, or not proliferating it and pushing it forward, such that actual distributed universal change can occur? Would you say that that would be your moral obligation as somebody that is like an anarcho-primitivist, or like a green anarchist or something like that?
I guess we're necessarily forced into all kinds of contradictions, and you just named a very, very basic one. I have a radio show, Anarchy Radio, twice a month. That's a university radio station, and I've been doing that for 25 years, trying to stimulate discussion and debate. And it's fully technological. I mean, it streams instantly around the world. That's the nature. In fact, you could hardly call it a radio station anymore. It's kind of well past the simple radio signal part of it. But
Right.
so I use it. I mean, if you don't use it, then you're just taking yourself out of the picture. That's even though you can also see the contradictions, which are of all kinds. I mean, when I used to do a fair amount of public speaking, I was taking a jet to various countries uh, pretty much all the time, and now we do it via Zoom or Google Meets or whatever it is. I mean, as it becomes a more and more remote dialogue,
Right.
which is another function of technology. But we use what we have. I mean, otherwise, you can, people have attacked me for these contradictions. Well, what kind of a primitivist are you? You're like everybody else. Well, I am like everybody else. I mean, but that's the nature of the thing. I mean, if I had a free choice, I sure as hell wouldn't choose this techno reality, but I don't have a free choice. So I'm trying to undermine it, and try to raise the questions and the critique.
Right. And we're talking about like the purview under which we do make moral decisions. It defines the conditions under which we have our morality and what we actually do within our day-to-day life. But the question would be, within a primitivist society, well, firstly I would ask, what would that look like? And secondly, what would your moral obligations be within a primitive society? Because I mean, if it's primitive, I mean, wouldn't that apply some level of some kind of arbitrary sets of ethics that people could have without justification necessarily for them? Or like, how would society operate like legally, and how would people be able to govern themselves morally, ethically? Would they have to within this kind of a primitive society? In your ideal world, what would that look like, and what would the answer to those questions be?
In the 1980s, I discovered anthropology. I'd never studied it before, but that was a huge entry into the reality that did obtain prior to domestication, which is only 10,000 years old, more or less. Uh, and it was a striking set of discoveries for me. I mean, the idea that people had a face-to-face shared existence without organized violence, without destroying the environment, with many, many examples of conscious strategies to avoid hierarchy, to avoid domination of uh, chiefs or leaders. Remarkable stuff. It sounds like utopian fantasy, but I remember starting to talk about that, and I would get this response from some people. Well, you're just making that up. That's not. Where do you get that? Well, the next time I ran into somebody from one of these talks who had taken a course in anthropology, he told me the instructor said just what you're saying, just exactly what you're saying. You weren't making it up. There was this pretty marvelous solution to living together, without insane population levels, without all these wars and work and everything else. It was fine, and it lasted for. I mean, take the species Homo erectus. which was about a million years in its longevity. There's some debate about when it actually did give way to, say, Neanderthals or whatever. But I mean, its remarkable stability speaks to its success. I
Right.
mean, the other way to look at that, for example, is to say, well, they didn't develop anything. They were just stuck. They were just well. If you have a good solution, you don't change it. You don't rush off to do something that's destructive, as it turns out. You stick with that. And I mean, that's one good answer to that objection, it seems to me. They weren't stuck because they were stupid or couldn't think through to better, more developed, more specialized answers. Why do that? You know, and now we can see if you want to do that, well, what do you get? You know, here we are in this crisis. Everything is failing. My next book is called "The Failure of Civilization." Just in a nutshell, there it is.
Right. I wanted to ask about this very concept because we have implications here of we've had societies wherein primitivism has worked, but really I want to interrogate what the definition of a of primitivism itself entails, right? So apparently, or at least from my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, primitivism would entail that there are some certain set of evolutionary characteristics that are built into human beings that make us function the way that they do, and they should be applied in these certain ways to produce this kind of society. And the question that I would ask is, if these set of biological traits, which are what primitivism is designated by, and its truth value is it's corroborated by. If it has led us to a technological society, then shouldn't we say, well, this is where it inevitably leads? We can't really make a value judgment on it because if we were to have a primitivist society, it would encapsulate these evolutionary traits. But the evolutionary traits bring us back here for more development, for innovation, for invention. How would we be able to say that that is wrong exactly, and by what metric?
Well, it's beneficial, I think, to look at this development as not inevitable or natural, but actually involving quite a struggle. Uh, Stanley Diamond's book "In Search of the Primitive" brings this out. He stresses what is largely overlooked, and that is the movement from simple societies, hunter gatherer life, that is, forager existence, whatever you want to call it, to domestication, mainly farming, namely, domestication of plants and animals, was not automatic. It wasn't built into some evolutionary scheme. It was a big fight. It was a big fight. And we see who lost and who won, but that doesn't mean there was anything inevitable about it. And it strikes me that one way to look at this, when people say, for example, well, if it's more or less built in, people just keep doing it. If you get rid of it, they'll just do it over again. Well, that doesn't strike me as a very good answer because if you see where it leads, what is the fatal outcome, why do it again? Why reproduce it? You want to do something different from that. Otherwise, you're just going down the same path that leads to all of the ruin, the ruin of the environment, the ruin of the psyche. All of this negative stuff that everybody can see every time they pick up a newspaper or go online. It's not hidden. It's right there.
So you're more of a you're more of a proponent of free will if we're speaking about it metaphysically. Do you believe that if we looked at it from a deterministic lens, we saw reality as deterministic, would you be able to make a value judgment then and say, yeah, well, there was a struggle between people that wanted it. So, for example, you had people like Luddites that were destroying instruments in the, during the Industrial Revolution because they didn't want their wages to go down. They didn't want their utility and their value and the value of their labor, really, and their contribution to society to diminish. But if we say that this is a necessary consequence of the interaction of human beings because of determinism, something metaphysical essential to reality, would we be able to say, well, we don't have an obligation to do this if we have the capacity for it?
So I take more of a Rousseauian take on that. I mean, he basically felt that people are not oppressors, it's institutions, and I think the most basic social institutions starts to turn them into oppressors, or I would say domesticators. But that's not a natural process. It involves corrosive institutions, and I start with division of labor. That was a very long, even great, I would say, glacially slow process, which eventually set the stage for the move to domestication. Again, the worst mistake in human history, as some people have put it. Uh, but that's a slow and largely not understood because it is so slow and everything is tied together in that movement. You don't even see it happening because it is so slow and in a way unobtrusive. But then you find yourself that the ground has shifted in this slow overall movement, and then it becomes a surprise when domestication bursts forth. But it doesn't burst forth out of nothing. You have to have the ingredients there for it to take place, for that leap to have occurred. Uh, so very recently in human history, by the way, it's very very recent in the long span of stuff. But it seems to me something like that is involved. That a movement that's so gradual, uh, then you're not really conscious of it. And things are moving so fast now. It's clearer to people. I mean, the technology is zooming forward by the hour. New stuff is happening with uh, AI and algorithms and every other part of it. I mean, but that wasn't always the case.
Right.
So that could explain why, because people say, well, where did domestication come from? If it wasn't a good idea, why did people do it? Well, it's a very, as I say, a very slow moving thing, and couldn't necessarily see ab origino where it's going. You know, what are the results, the outcomes? You know, if you've never been there before, you don't know where it's going to go. Now we do know where it's going to go. Here we are in this perhaps terminal condition.
Right. And I wanted to ask because really this is kind of something that we're getting at here. We keep referring back to the good, the bad, the utilities, the negativities that uh, technology brings about. I really wanted to ask about get down to the metaphysics of it, really, because we all foundationalize our beliefs on a certain set of epistemological foundations and metaphysical foundations. Do you believe in your predication of, an ideal society? You refer to this kind of um, utopia, for example, that would look like a more primitivist society. Do you think this is foundationalized on something like, the existence of God? Would the existence of God be necessary for your moral value judgments on this, or what kind of moral theory do you really subscribe to? Is it deontological? Is it utilitarian? How does it relate to the way that we make decisions and value judgments about society and what is wrong and what is right?
Well, again, I tend to return to the anthropology. For example, uh, there are studies, Richard Borsche Lee, for example, in the Kalahari some years ago, he was studying the uh, the San people, and he was describing uh, examples, very consistent examples of anti-hierarchical consciousness in practice. For example, people would go out on the hunt and bring back game for the group, right? But the group would greet the hunter with scorn. Would, for example, routinely say stuff like, "Well, why did you bother to bring that? It's gone bad, or it's stringy. It's not very good." Instead of worshiping this person who then maybe develop power over the other people in the group because he's the mighty hunter, he's the hero.
Right.
Well, they did that. It was obviously a conscious plan to prevent the hierarchy from starting. And you can see that on a primitive level. And people were conscious of that. I mean, people make decisions. We make decisions insofar as we have the scope to make decisions. Now, we try to navigate, but this has gone so far that we don't have a whole lot of room to make good choices. I mean, Adorno said, there's no right life in the wrong world. In other words, if it's
Right.
gone so far bad, then what are you left with? And I've been attacked as Donna Haraway referred to me once as a angry prophet inveighing against reality from outside of reality. Well, I'm not outside of reality, and I don't think of myself as a prophet either. But she said, and she's supposedly a radical, you've got to play the game. You have nothing that anybody wants unless you're part of the system. Well, I've always rejected that totally. That's you've sold out before you even started if that's your attitude.
Right, and so we make a delineation between her worldview and her disposition on this is like, well, if you're not participating within the society and what, the rest of people also, believe to be utile, despite the fact that it may be the case that it's actually not utile to them. And, we have people like you that, advocate for staying outside of that. But again, the compass is going to be really the objective focus here. How do we determine if that is objectively a bad choice? How do we know that it is not based on some hypothetical norm? That it's not based on some like preference here. Like for example, me and you might have a preference to that an affinity or a proclivity towards living in a more primitivist society. How do we tell people objectively this is what is the objective predication upon which we can say that you are wrong and this is what reality must be like. This is what we must go forward. Barring any opinionation or any preferential analysis.
Well, I don't know. As an anarchist, I would not uh, prescribe any coercive regimen for people. I mean, it always is a choice. Some people may prefer it. They couldn't even conceive of life outside of civilization.
Right.
And I'm not saying I would be successful within such a situation. Not only am I older, but I don't know if I could hack that. Uh, I'm not saying that I could pull it off, but I mean, if you have some very good grounds for comparing a better world than this one that's going under, it strikes me, on a global basis, then you can make an argument or at least provide an alternative that may or may not be appealing to people as things get worse. Because there's always the alternative. Some people will just take drugs until they're dead. Prescribed drugs, or I'm not exempt from that either. I mean, I enjoy a large martini every night.
Right.
I'm not addicted, I don't think, but we all needed some escape from this reality. It's just it's nothing unhealthy about that, or not very unhealthy. It may
Somewhat
be
unhealthy.
somewhat unhealthy, but
Yeah.
we're all here and we're all part of this thing, me included for sure. So, but I don't know how, because that's you get close to, well, you're trying to impose this primitivist world on everybody else. No, I'm not. I wouldn't be an anarchist if I looked at it that way. I know the one I would prefer in relative terms. I mean, I wouldn't say that hunter-gatherer life is the perfect model. We just take that example uh, in some exactitude, and you must live this way around the campfire without any specialization or people ruling other people. I mean, that's my preferences are pretty obvious, but that's again, I have no idea how
Right.
it'll turn out. Will we get a chance to seriously question this in terms of the conversation in society or not? At the moment, there's not very much good odds to predict the outcome I would prefer. That what passes for politics now is absurd. You know, the whole category is absurd. You know, you can imagine a life without, quote, politics. I sure can.
Gotcha. Right. Um, I want to ask somewhat about your, I guess, personal beliefs as it goes down to, things that range from metaphysics to epistemology, because that's kind of what the channel revolves around. So when we have like a philosophical thinker, we'd like to ask them these questions. What do you believe in God? What is your kind of like spiritual or metaphysical disposition in that way? Do you believe in God? Do you believe like in a higher set of ethics or like in a religion or something?
I wouldn't say I believe in God, but I do. I am very interested in the spiritual as a dimension, and I've learned something about indigenous people. It's it's hard to generalize, but the whole category of animism as the earth as a living thing, a connection to the land, which is spiritual. All of that appeals to me a lot.
Right.
But I really started philosophically from the Frankfurt School, from Adorno, Marcuse, and so forth, um, putting the problems uh, in terms of the questions in modern society and taking modern society as a given. But the Frankfurt School started to depart from that, I think. You know, the critique of enlightenment, that enlightenment stated that we would get rid of superstition and myth and irrational thinking. But they've pointed out, especially Adorno and Horkheimer, that enlightenment is its own myth. It doesn't get away from it.
Right.
It's embedded in that is its own myth, and uh, which is they came very close to a critique of civilization. They didn't quite go all the way, but in the dialectic of enlightenment, they discussed that. For example, they talked about the Odyssey, book 12, where Odysseus and his crew are trying to sail past the island with the sirens, and the sirens are singing their song, and they want the crew to come ashore and party, right? Have a
Right.
good time. Well, Homer, of course, projected that as a death trip. You don't want to go there. You want to
Right.
sail past it. And Odysseus had the crew's ears stopped up with wax, had
I'm sorry.
himself
I don't
tied
mean
to
to
the
interrupt,
mast.
but there's for the meeting. There's like less than a minute left. Would you want to do
Oh,
like
sorry.
would you want to do like do you want me to recreate a meeting so you would have a little bit more time to speak and then we could lead on into the conclusion so it's more
If you like,
cohesive?
sure. We
Sorry.
could talk some more.
Sure. That's
Sure.
wonderful. Thank you, Mr. Zerzan. It's a great pleasure, great honor to have you on. And yeah, thank you. Have a wonderful day.
You too.